Hey guys, welcome back. Today we're talking about pre-listing inspections. What is a pre-listing inspection? Should you do one when getting ready to sell your home? I'm Jeb Smith, Coldwell Banker Residential Brokerage here in Huntington Beach. And over the last couple weeks, we've touched on home inspections, which I'll link to below, a video on the home inspection. But today we're talking about a pre-listing inspection. So a pre-listing inspection or a pre-home inspection is essentially a home inspection that you do prior to listing your home for sale. And the reason this comes up, because often in listing presentations, I'll get the seller who has interviewed with another agent or maybe thought of it on their own. Hey, look, should I get a home inspection prior to listing my house for sale? That way I know what's wrong with it. Or that way I have a list of all the items that are wrong and I can do the repairs before the house goes on the market. And while in theory it sounds like a really good idea, I often recommend against them. In fact, I always recommend against them. And in my experience, it hasn't hurt me. In fact, a lot of times I think it benefits the seller. And today that's what we're going to talk about. So I'm against doing pre-listing inspections, pre-home inspections for the reasons that we're going to talk about now. For one, anytime you do a home inspection, or any inspection for that matter, you are then required to disclose that to any new buyer that comes in the process, in the transaction. So say, for example, you're in escrow, or say you're not even in escrow, you get a pre-listing home inspection or a pre-home inspection, you get a buyer on that property, you're required to disclose that inspection to that buyer. Or say, for example, you're in escrow with a buyer, they do a home inspection, and it falls out of escrow, you're required to, again, pass on that home inspection to the next buyer or any inspections that they've done. And that goes the same, like I mentioned, with the pre-home inspection. So once you're aware of issues with the property, I'm using issues, quote unquote, you're required to disclose those to the buyer or potential buyer when buying a property. And what I will tell you is that, and the reason I'm against these is because as a seller, you're required to disclose what you know. And so once you have an inspection, that's something essentially that you know about the property. And so you're required to disclose it. Well, if you're not aware of it, you're not required to disclose it. And it's not that I'm telling you to hide something as a seller or keep something from someone. I'm just telling you that the less you know, in some cases, the better off you are in disclosure purposes and disclosing to other people, right? Because say you come in and you get a really, really picky inspector who inspects the property and they list a laundry list of items on the property on that pre-inspection. And now you're required to disclose that. Well, keep in mind the buyer wasn't there when that inspection was completed. So that home inspector is not there to talk them through the items that he found or she found in that matter. So, when buyers read reports, a lot of times, as I've mentioned in home inspection videos before, a lot of time it reads a lot worse than it actually is. It may be something really, really simple, but when you read it on paper and there's a photo of it, it may seem like a lot larger deal. Well, people buy emotionally and they justify logically, right? So if they get in there and there's something that bothers them emotionally about the process, a lot of times they'll back out of the transaction before ever moving forward with it, right? Because logically, they're not thinking logically. They're in a position where they've got a lot of new things going on. They're buying a house. It's a big purchase. It's a lot of money out of pocket, what have you. So they're already emotional. They see something like this, they get scared, they back out. And so that's one, right? So you've got an inspector who could do an inspection on the property and bring back items that may seem worse than they actually are. Secondly, you get an inspector, or say, for example, now you get that pre-inspection and you're planning to fix all of those items prior to listing it for sale. Well, you may get a buyer who is buying that property who doesn't care about any of those things, right? Maybe they're a contractor, maybe they're really handy, so the list of items that you're spending this money to repair isn't really a big deal to them. And so you're repairing a lot of things maybe that they don't care about. So you're spending this money to repair items that may or may not come up in an actual request for repairs. And then they could go back and find something else with their inspector that actually is important to them. So maybe you've spent $3, $4, $5 doing repairs, and now a new buyer comes in and they get their own inspection and something else comes up that the first inspector didn't catch or what have you. And this item is really important to them, but because you've already fixed all of the items as the seller and you feel like your inspection report was thorough, that now you don't want to fix that additional item. So all the items that you fixed maybe were important, maybe not. See, the thing is, you never know. And so that's what I tell sellers in selling a property is just wait till the inspection comes in. For one, you're not disclosing a laundry list of items that you're aware of up front. You're not doing a big list of repairs up front that may or may not be important to the buyer. I will tell you, in working with buyers and working with sellers, a lot of times, even if we get, if you're working with a seller, you get a long request for repairs. A lot of times you're able to whittle that down to just a few items. They're really important items, finding out what's really important to the buyer and whittle that down to a few items that, a lot of times a couple $100, maybe $1,000 credit, what have you, depending on what the items are, gets you out of that. Whereas if you would have repaired everything that came up on the home inspection, it would have been well over a couple of $1,000. And the same thing is for, for a buyer. A lot of times a buyer will make a really big list of items, and I know from experience that a seller a lot of times pushes away when they see a big list of items. So let's focus on the things that are important and try to get the seller to either give us a credit or do those items. So it really whittles down to a small list of items. Now, there are cases where I've negotiated a really large sum for requests for repairs, but I will tell you, in 17 plus years of doing this, it's not often. And I will, I always tell sellers not to do pre-inspections for the reasons that we've talked about today. And, I just feel like it's, in theory, it seems like a good idea. You can fix all of these items up front, but if it doesn't mean anything to the buyer to begin with, and you spent this money to do it, then what does it really matter? And the only way to find out is to let the buyer do the inspection and then come back with their own items, at which point then you can address them. Because if you were willing to address it prior to listing your house, then in theory you should be willing to address it once the buyer brings it to your attention through the request for repairs. And that way you save by not spending on the home inspection to start, and then maybe you're not fixing as many items as you would had initially. So I hope that's helpful. If you have additional questions, do me a favor, comment below, or send me a direct message through social media or through my email. I'm happy to address it. As always, I appreciate you taking the time to watch, and we'll see you again soon. Have an awesome day. Bye-bye.